Well, hello there. It's Rupert August and me, and we will talk about Peter Hitchens' Reefer Sadness. There you are. Yeah, how did you like the essay in general, stylistic?
Um, it was very eminently readable, but before we go into any details like that, should we sort of summarize what it's all about?
Yeah, if you want to go.
Well, it's fairly simple, really. Peter Hitchens is fairly well known for holding these kinds of positions and just sort of sticking to them regardless of how the times move. And this is one of those cases where he's continuing to emphasize his opposition to marijuana as a significant drug and not something that is as harmless as the sort of current society and societal trends have sort of led everyone to believe. It's sort of been a little bit more absorbed into the culture now and into the milieu as something that's just kind of like, it's not as bad as, well, okay, no, he actually gives a quote that summarizes the general modern view of it. So I'll just read that out verbatim. The quote goes, "Marijuana is safe, way safer than alcohol. Barack Obama smoked it, Bill Clinton smoked it too, even if he didn't inhale. Might as well say it causes presidencies. I've smoked it myself, I liked it fine. Maybe I got a little paranoid, but it didn't last. Nobody ever died from smoking too much pot." And I should say that in reference to the "I smoked it myself" part, this isn't Peter Hitchens talking, this is Alex Berenson, who Peter Hitchens is bringing up as a writer who has recently released a book which goes along the same kind of track of looking a little bit more critically at marijuana and coming out a little bit more against it than most other writers seem to want to at the moment.
Yeah, the book is called Tell Your Children the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illnesses and Violence.
Yeah, and that's just the core idea basically going throughout, is that marijuana has caused a worsening of mental health, and alongside a worsening in mental health has made people less civil. It's increased violence, partially based on the observation by the psychiatrist wife of Alex Berenson, who noted that basically everybody, like all the violent criminals, have a history of using marijuana, and so Peter Hitchens is pointing this out and sort of emphasizing the point that long-term marijuana use does indeed affect mental health poorly. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and he's I read quite a few of his I guess essays or articles you can call them, and he always snipe at one point or another he will snipe at Mariana.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can add a little bit more context then, because I'm not so familiar with the background of his work. I really only have this to go on, and the general fact that he doesn't think that we actually waged a proper war on drugs. It's just that we sort of claimed it and then waged it sort of half-heartedly.
Yeah, it actually quite been a long time gone, but it's something about the recurring theme of always if somebody does violent crime, there is also at one point mentioned, or in the history of the person, there is um, high activity of smoking weed. Let's just call it like that. And I think a lot of the how we will call them Islamist terrorists have smoked at one point or another weed, which probably led them to a psychosis rift or something to that kind. And yeah, I guess the notion of the book as well is the war we never fought is we never went against the weed, which you can see most laws is pretty relaxed. If you really want to go hard about something, you will sanction higher penalties as well for distribution and whatnot.
So I think part of his point that he reiterates in the, well, feel free to correct me though if I'm wrong. He reiterates it in the article, which is that they never properly prosecuted just possession or use. They only ever wanted to attack the distribution side, but never actually the user side to anywhere near the same extent. And that's one of his main criticisms, is that the way that he puts it, Mr. Big, i.e. the drug kingpins and the dealers and whatever, those were the ones that were being prosecuted and chased, whereas Mr. Small, the actual user who was supporting the whole industry and ensuring that there would be a continued demand that needs to be met by any number of impoverished and violence-prone dealer class at the lower level that are willing to fill in that and inherit the infrastructure. The fact that they never went out after that side, the demand side, meant that they never really were actually serious about it. They just wanted to put on a good face of opposing it.
Yeah, I haven't read the book. I just read a few articles by him where he always snipes against marijuana. But to the point about going against the demand side of the equation, I think it's also that it's a comfort drug, let's call it like that. It's a lot of students do it, or let's just call it like it is. The students take a giant amount of drugs, and they're rich or high upper class and higher upper class parents don't really want to get into trouble if they got caught with drugs or mild drugs. So they don't really rail against it. They just go up against the distribution side.
Yes, yeah, that's probably part of it, especially on the higher end, and particularly considering a lot of the the hippie generation that were first sort of delving into this kind of thing. They gained a slight bias towards it, obviously, but also or at least a fairly laissez-faire attitude towards the drug, but then also wanted to cover up and sort of happily turned a blind eye to their own progeny using it. And he doesn't quite say it, but I have to imagine that through that mechanism, it also became sort of a little bit more synonymous with higher status as well. When people in power are sort of like readily acknowledging the fact that they've used it in the past, and a blind eye is turned to people of power and influence, or at least people with proximity to power and influence, like heirs and children of powerful people.
Well, those snort cocaine, and that's a different topic.
Well, yeah, I mean, he doesn't go down the line of it being a gateway drug or anything like that. He's sticking very strictly on the effects of marijuana itself, not so much the wider societal impact. He's just purely making the point that it negatively affects mental health. But that's the thing that stuck out to me the most, actually, because it does kind of, if you accept his hypothesis, I guess there's a number of different ways that you can look at the deteriorating mental health situation, and that's one of the things that I have thought about myself. And there's a lot of different answers to it. And so if you take this answer to be sort of correct, then it rules out a lot of other things, or potentially fills that gap. Some examples might be overdiagnosing. So we're just sort of pathologizing normal mindsets that have existed in the past for time immemorial, but all of a sudden we've decided that they are disorders or deficiencies in some way. So that's you would associate something like ADHD in boys with that kind of thing. Another might be that modern society is fundamentally incompatible with healthy humanity. So we're sort of driven crazy just by existing in modern society unless we're drugged up. That would be another way of looking at it that I've heard. What else?
Well, it numbs the population as well.
Yeah,
I guess this comes to your point. You mentioned it as well, and that point about is it Brave New World?
Yep.
With the
Brave New
Soma?
World and Soma.
It's not
Yeah.
1984. Well,
No, that's
at any
Brave New World.
point, at any point, you have a pacifier of the population, which certainly helps.
Yes, and then applying that to the sort of present as well, the way that that's numbed the activist class is something he points out, because he does make a point of stating that it's basically his generation of leftists and agitators in particular who have succumbed to this sort of thing. And in his case, he was going for the revolutionary sort of more Bolshevist Marxist line of we need to change the world by actually changing it, whereas a lot of his compatriots and the way that a lot of the activist energies have been absorbed recently, so he says, is by just getting absorbed in all of the free love side of things that just numbs the brain to the extent where they're no longer concerned about changing things that are wrong with society. They just want to sort of dope themselves up so that they no longer care that anything's wrong.
Well, I guess smoking weed and hash as well are somewhat baked into the identity of some parts of the left.
Yeah, definitely. Or just sort of casual, much more casual attitude towards mind-altering substances generally.
Yes, very much indeed. But as well, with, well, let's just call it weed marijuana. To say this hassle, weed is much more easily consumed than any other drugs, and you can much more easily work on it. For example, just smoking a quick spliff is not the same as shooting up heroin. You can almost most certainly function in your daily activities. So yeah, it's a much more easier drug to use day to day than other drugs or mind altering drugs.
Yes. Well, especially considering this trend towards decriminalization and legalization. He also made a surprising point that I'd never come across before, which is that according to, I don't know if it's a statistic that sort of applies at the national level or whether it was a more local thing, but one of the distributors of medical marijuana said that only 6% of his clients were actually using, only 6% of medical marijuana users were actually using it for medicinal purposes. Much more the case that they are that it's basically just giving a screen to people who want to smoke it without consequence, without legal consequence particularly.
Yes, and a point also to consider is that marijuana or weed in the current age is very much different than what was smoked or used in the time of the hippies. It's much more it's much more bred for THC, which is the active component in the weed. So, and THC, I think THC is linked with all kinds, or is the part that is linked with mental disorders. But there's also some other ingredient or active ingredients as well as CBCD, something like that, which somewhat negates the effects of THC, but which is bred out of the different strains, so it's more potent, so you get more high.
Yeah, that is something something to bear in mind. That we're not talking about the same drug throughout time necessarily. There have been changes to how it's composed and the potency of it and everything.
Yeah,
he didn't bring that up in the article, but yeah, it's probably something that's worth bearing in mind.
I think if I recall correctly, the weed that was used in the hippie generation was about 3 to 6% THC, and the modern range easily from 10 to 30, and the median being about 20-ish. So that's very much increased.
Yeah.
Potency. And as well, by buying it, or why it's bred is it's bred for, so it's more stronger, and the whole industry protecting it or growing it, it's a giant industry because there's easily money made. But there's also it depends on the country, but there's quite high risk as well. But you can easily move some amount of weed and make some money on the side.
So Hitchens makes the point quite clearly that what we really should be doing is cracking down on this seriously and actually trying to be much more draconian, I guess might be a word, about the proliferation of marijuana and especially attitudes towards it, and trying to get that turned around and actually properly prosecuting. But is there a libertarian way out of this? I guess would be one question. Just to try and take a different lens, because to me this would represent a sort of weakness of libertarianism as popularly constructed. Of course, there's ways to frame this in libertarian terms that are a little bit more capable of getting around the issue, but it does seem like a thing that is imposing costs on the rest of society for the sake of personal highs.
Well, there is, but nobody wants to hear it.
Yeah.
Just let the people die.
Oh, yeah, I guess, yeah. Well, the point though is that they're not killing themselves. It would be a different matter, perhaps, if we were talking about heroin. But the point is more that they're becoming more psychotic and violent in particular. So you're going to see an increase in violent crime. So the line of thinking goes, if we just sort of allow it to be proliferated more and more.
Somewhat, because it's certainly true, or probably true, that there has never been an overdose, but that doesn't mean that the drug takes a giant part out of your life, being it financially or time, because especially those mind-altering drugs have a certain culture attached to it, which consumes a lot of time that you think about using the drug or perfecting how to use the drug, or general, let's call it hippie culture or weed culture, whatever, or music as well. And this takes time as well. And this time is not spent productively. If you want to keep that, it's kind of weird because the culture feeds itself, and it feeds that you smoke more weed. And when you smoke more weed, it furthers the culture of smoking more weed, and it's circular logic at one point. It's pretty hard to break out of it.
Yeah.
And as well, it's definitely addictive, and you will have, first of all, it's addictive. It will ruin your sleep pattern, and you will get physically ill if you haven't smoked in a while.
I didn't know that, because that's one of the arguments that people bring up a lot about marijuana, is that it's not addictive like some of the other drugs are.
It definitely is.
But I mean, I would also say that there's the behavioral addiction, where they get addicted to a certain frame of mind rather than a chemical addiction that has withdrawal symptoms in the same way that we would usually associate. Although, funnily enough, actually, Peter Hitchens himself is also skeptical of the phenomenon of addiction and thinks that it's sort of like a fake diagnosis. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, that's quite amusing, but yeah.
Okay, could you say any more about the addiction side of things then? Because again, I'm not too familiar.
Well, it depends. First of all, it depends of the amount you use. But if you mostly it starts, your level of consumption will shoot up definitely higher if you learn how to roll yourself, because it's quite difficult. You will learn it at one point, but on another point you will learn it, or learn how to do it, and then you can smoke on your own. It's not longer constrained by a friend group where you have somebody that can smoke or know how to roll the joint, basically. And if you go over that step to roll your own joints, your amount taken in will drastically increase, because there's no limit besides you financially how much you're gonna take in. So your consumption shoots up exponentially, which means, and it also depends kind of on your self-control and what your job is and whatnot, details, but you can smoke all day long. And the problem is, if you haven't smoked in the evening, you can't go to sleep, which is why you have to smoke a joint before bed, basically. And if you stop it, you cannot go to sleep. So it's also a kind of numbner or go to sleep medicine, I guess, but it's not really medicine.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm completely uncredentialed in this area, as you can probably tell. So yeah, I don't know. Unless we've got anything else to bring up, we could probably cut this fairly short. I think it was a fairly simple article / essay. Marijuana is bad. Peter Hitchens is still holding the flag of resistance to it.
Yeah.
Regardless of the fact that the rest of society seems to have become completely complacent with it. And so, perhaps worth bearing in mind that maybe the increase in use of marijuana and maybe mind-altering substances more generally is contributing towards the current sort of mental health crisis.
Very much so. Would you go think about policy which you could try to constrain it? Do you have suggestions, or you're, I guess, open-minded?
Personally, I have a fairly open mind as to what policies were used. Ultimately, the best thing that would be able to stop it would be, to my mind, soft pressure from society being against it, and that would potentially require a significant amount of elite cooperation, because I tend to think these things sort of filter down. So you'd have to have the elite on board with the idea that marijuana is bad, and then filter that down, basically making smoking marijuana a low status behavior. So anyone who has aspirations of being higher status, doesn't smoke marijuana, and that's probably the most effective way to stop people from doing it. Ultimately, in the longer term, obviously, you've got to get rid of all the people that have addictions to it, and I don't mean get rid of in terms of like executing or anything like that. I just mean you have to have a different solution for those people, because they're not going to mind so much about status in that case. But
I guess you have to invest those people more into society. I mean, or wrap them more into it, because why would you get high? Well, if you're a student, I can tell you have excess time on your hands, and it's funny. But otherwise, how do you stop a society from basically tuning out?
yeah, that would be something that is, I guess, requiring of either a more busy day generally amongst the vast majority of people, whether that be because they're working more or just because, well, it's like the whole saying, idle hands make the devil's work. Is that how it goes? I think.
I was thinking about something different, but I will leave it.
Okay, fine. But
okay.
Point being, either people are working more, or they've got more social activities that are actually, like more communal and more active, and don't and sort of preclude the use of marijuana. That would be another way of going about it. If you're looking at it that way, but I think there was not too long ago there was a thing with heroin in Scotland where they had the same sort of thing. Just it was completely replete, it was everywhere. But a lot of those people were also in jobs. They were in gainful employment, and they were like in society. They weren't just complete outcasts, but they were also doing heroin. They were also nurturing a heroin addiction and using their job to fund the heroin habit. So there are ways in which these things can go together, but maybe it would just be a generational thing where you have to sort of like wait out the fact that some of those people are just going to like pass through the generations, and newer generations aren't going to pick it up at the same rate. But I think that's been the expectation from smoking, and that hasn't worked so far. So maybe you would need something a little bit more robust, a little bit more deliberate, to try and get people to actually stop smoking it.
Well, smoking cigarettes is a different point, but I guess I just got thinking that drugs also bring a certain spirituality in your life.
Yeah, that's what Ernst Junger was getting into, as I recall. So he got into psychedelics particularly. And he was looking at it from that sort of like mind altering or mind expanding perspective, and that's definitely popular as well. But that is probably quite necessarily a very small group. A very small group of people. Maybe that was the thin end of the wedge with some of the hippies as to why they got into it.
But I'm not speaking from experience, but if you go there, or if you get high, for example, on LSD, there's definitely something there, or mushroom, or whatever. So, is it really only in your minds? Probably, or at least it's better for your society if you tell people that, so they don't tune out. Because if they just get high on pills or whatnot and check out of society, that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, the point that I was kind of like meandering around was that this is a small group of people, and it probably will never be that big of a group of people. And the reason that marijuana has become more than that is, I think, probably more down to the fact that it's become something that is, chemically enjoyable in one way or another. And for a time, it was maybe not high status, but at least reasonably, middling status, or not a low status behavior, as you might say. So there was a sort of permissiveness in terms of like how it would affect one's standing to be using it. If somebody just wanted any kind of like mind-altering experience without the additional sort of spiritual component of trying to see the unseen and things like that. Because I think those people are in a vast minority.
But I think there's still something there, that even if you work, I mean, if you ever got stuck in a shitty office job, I could imagine why you get home and smoke your brains out. I can understand that. So I guess you have to fill your life with some kind of spirituality or religion that provides that, and also speaks against this habit. Or you have to be more invested into life, that you don't tune out. You have to be busy, but I think work will not always set you free, to use a certain kind of
One way of putting it.
terminology.
What's that in German again?
Arbeit macht frei. Work will set you free.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm just comparing it to something fairly stereotypical, like the working class existence of like Victorian England or that kind of time, where you have all of these people who are working a hell of a lot more than we do in the present day, doing even more mind-numbing jobs often than we could possibly imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't really seem like they were. I mean, obviously drunkenness was probably a bit of an issue. I don't actually have statistics, but I assume it was probably worse of an issue than it is now. I'm not sure, actually. I guess probably so. But in any case, but they still had like fairly robust communities that were, making sure that there were other things going on, especially for children who had some kind of like community amongst themselves. I don't know. Maybe my my impressions, like the more that I think about it, maybe my impressions of the period are not quite as well informed as they would need to be to make this point. But it's something worth thinking about, I guess, like comparing the past.
Well, I think alcohol, to beat this point to death, is you in general you have certain currents in the society. It's just a question how you move them, or how you bend the river, so to speak, that it works somewhat productively or isn't that harmful. So I would say that maybe if you drink a beer, or beer especially, it's somewhat more healthy than smoking a joint.
Yeah,
But
probably not that much more healthy, but well, I mean, I guess it depends on whether it's 1 or 2 or 5 or 6.
yeah, but still. But the point is, you better choose the less evil devil.
Yeah.
And I guess a pint in the evening doesn't hurt anybody.
Yeah, not as bad. Especially if you're in that older environment of doing very physically demanding work and you need some of those empty calories.
Oh yes, very much so. Okay, we went from smoking weed to filling your spiritual hole to beer. Do you have anything else to say?
No, I don't think so. We've already covered about twice as much as I thought we'd get out of this. So
okay. Any closing remarks?
I mean, I think I generally agree with him that marijuana is indeed bad. Although I probably take this slightly more harsh view that basically all mind altering is a bit degenerate. Leave it to the weirdo priests and the spiritually adventurous types who don't mind ruining their soul. Try and stick to reality as straightforwardly perceived, because then you're not being lied to by your brain.
Okay. Yeah, I guess don't smoke. And if you smoke, keep it to a limit.
Yeah, but better still, drink. It's the traditional. It's the traditional Indo-European.
Jesus, drinking is German, okay, or English. Just do it, not in excess. Don't don't grab to the hard liquor. That isn't good as well. Stay with beer. God damn it.
Get some real ale in you.
Yeah. Well, Guinness will fill you. Anyway, do you have anything to chill? Chill.
No, nothing
Chill.
in particular. Just as ever, my YouTube, which any day now it'll come back to life. Any day now, and my Twitter at Rupert August. Well, you can find me under the same name anywhere.
Yeah, will there be a new episode of Guide to Culture?
Guide to Culture.
Wasn't this a episode or something you had?
No, Casual Chat is my.
Casual Chat. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'll probably produce some more of that at some point. I've got some ideas as to where I'm going to take it, but we'll have to see what the future brings.
Okay. Oh, Jesus, I cannot speak anymore. Get out of here. Goodbye. Have a nice evening, I guess. Bye-bye.
Good evening.
I have to press the right button.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're still live.